life hacks, leadership tips, stories, and fun. It's time for Two Guys on Stuff with Michael Edwards and Tom Tobin. They're executives, entrepreneurs, and great friends. And this is a conversation about values-based, purpose-driven leadership that can transform you, your organization, and the world. Now, let's hear what stuff the guys are talking about this week.
Welcome back to Two Guys on Stuff. Tom, it has been an amazing 10 weeks so far.
Oh my gosh, isn't that crazy? It's already been 10 weeks, 8 guests, spanning all kinds of industries, just phenomenal.
And just think about it, to make it a year, we've only got to do like 42 more of these.
You know what? I used to think that it would be really difficult, but you really get to meet some wonderful people. So I think that it's sustainable. I think that there's a whole lot more than 52 great leaders that are willing to share, and that's definitely a consistent theme, is their willingness to share with others. So we're really grateful for all the guests that have graced us and dropped just chunks of gold for all of our listeners.
One of the funny things, Tom, is that we started this out saying there's no way that we can not talk a whole bunch, and we've proven that. And our goal was to make these 30-minute episodes, and we average probably about 52 minutes. So there's just so much leadership gold, knowledge, best practices flowing from all of our guests that there's just no way in heck we could get it down to 30 minutes. So
yeah, that's the thing is this it's like asking a brain surgeon, hey, can you make that surgery just a little bit shorter?
Right.
Well, I could rush through it, but it's not going to come out the same. And I think that's the thing is it's better that people take their time and maybe listen to it in 2 chunks than just try and spew out a couple of quick nuggets. I don't think that they're as valuable when you don't hear the people's story behind the nuggets and their applications. So hopefully our listeners have been patient with us. I'm sure that they have been, and I know that if they've spent an hour listening to any one of our guests, they've found it to be wonderful and informative. So I'm comfortable.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, the feedback has been phenomenal. I got a phone call from a listener who happens to be somebody who I used to work with and actually is a good friend. And they talked about listening to the episode with Kathleen Forrest and how impactful it was to them. And they made the commitment to both themselves and me that they were going to continue doing that and really jump back on the leadership growth bandwagon. So I know we've reached at least one person in a positive way.
Yeah, exactly. I'm thinking more than one, but yeah. And that's the thing is the feedback that we get, the way that people will hang on to a nugget and then say, this is how I'm going to apply that day. I feel like I taught them how to use a circular saw, and I'm going to go out and I'm going to build something. And that's what it is the nuggets that they provide aren't just little, nuggets of wisdom. They're tools, they're ways of thinking that our listeners can apply today. And so it's been fantastic. So, I think that was one of the things in bringing together episode 11 here is looking back at the last, the first 2 was us, and okay, we can repeat what we said, but looking at the consistency and some of the consistent pieces over the last 8 episodes with our guests and how that derives this similar sense of activity, these similar tools that they utilize. So why don't you, can you kick us off, and what was the first thing that you noticed that was consistent across each of our leaders?
Yeah. So, my favorite question that you ask our guests is if you could go back to the 22, 23, 24-year-old self, what would it be? And across the board, you and I included, said get a mentor. For everybody that we've spoken with, that's been something that's been impactful and been powerful. And for me, it's been very impactful and really changed who I am, not only as a leader, but as a husband and a friend and a member of my community. I'm fortunate to be mentored by the John Maxwell team and John Maxwell himself and Mark Cole and a whole host of phenomenal mentors. And that's just a commonality that I see across the board.
Yeah, I heard terms, oftentimes the terms are used interchangeably, the difference between a coach or a mentor. And so each of our guests might have used that term interchangeably. And, I'm curious how you define a coach versus a mentor. For me, one of the key differences, when I think of a coach, I think of Tom Landry. To me, in my life, Tom Landry was the person who he was the one always dressed in a suit and tie and a top hat. He not a top hat. He had a hat on. He was always the one that was leading the Dallas Cowboys, and there when they failed, and there when they were in victory, and he was guiding them through the mechanics of the team activities. And I look at that versus maybe a mentor as somebody who is going to help you with the bigger picture, that is going to take you through different aspects of your character, not just mentoring you through a job process or that type of an activity, but also someone that is probably also going to have deeper discussions with you about what does it mean to be this leader? What are character traits? What about communication skills? So I see that a little bit different. What about you? Do you see them the same, or do you see them differently?
Yeah, so there is a distinct difference in coaching and mentoring, in that the coaching process is, sometimes it's more short term, and a lot of times it's more around performance or task, whereas the mentor, to your point, is more about character and long-term things like vision and values and things like that. But that's not to say that the mentor can't be the coach. They certainly can go through the coaching process and coach for performance and those kinds of things. But really, the mentor is looking more towards development. And,
Yeah, and I think for our listeners too, just to help them define that, is really, they don't necessarily need to go with our definition. They really need to determine, and would you agree that they really need to determine what is it that they need? What is it that they're trying to accomplish? Yeah. And then working with somebody that can meet that.
It's all really situational, based on the needs of the individual.
Right.
And it's interesting. So I'm leading a mastermind right now on the 15 invaluable laws of growth, and I've got leaders from all over the country in various states of leadership or tenure of leadership, going from first job out of college to been doing it for 20 years. And last week we talked about mentorship specifically, and I'll share with you straight out of the book, 15 Invaluable Laws of Growth. There's some responsibilities that the mentee and the mentor have. A lot of times people just go out and find, hey, you want to be my mentor? Well, great.
Yeah,
they might not be able to add value, and you want to make sure that you've got the right person for you. So John Maxwell.
You're not looking for a buddy or a counselor.
Yeah, exactly. I don't need somebody to tell me what I want to hear. I need somebody who's going to help me get better. Yeah. And right out of the book, John Maxwell writes, if you find a mentor, you've got some responsibilities to this relationship. Number one, you must possess a teachable spirit. Number two, always be prepared. Number three, ask questions. Number four, demonstrate learning from them. And number five, be accountable. And he also talks about, if you're a mentor, you should focus on teaching on the following areas: strengths, temperament, track record, passion, choices, advice, support and resources, feedback, and encouragement. And he's got a really simple process if you're a mentee, and it's cyclical, right, or a circle. Here's what I asked you. Here's what I heard you share with me. Here's what I did. Now can I ask you more questions? And the mentor-mentee relationship's pretty simple if you find the right group.
Yeah, exactly. Love it. So, hey, the story, the nugget for that is, if you're listening, find a mentor, find a coach, and then make sure that you understand this is something that's not going to be done to you. It's going to be done with you, and you've got to participate, and both of you need to know your role. And also, just don't pick your buddy. Pick somebody that's going to be able to feed into you and has already run the race successfully.
Yeah, and you actually just hit a key item differentiation between coach and mentor. Coach is often a push relationship from the coach to the coachee, Whereas the mentor-mentee relationship is pull. A coach is going to come to you and say, hey, here's some things that we can do to improve performance, or ask you the question, what do you think you can do to improve your performance? But in the mentor-mentee relationship, the mentee drives that relationship, asking questions and looking for help. So you pointed out a clear distinction. Thank you for doing that.
Yeah, I find a coach is like Tom Landry and a mentor is like Yoda. So
yeah, that's a perfect illustration.
Yeah. So what was something else that you kind of saw consistently across the board with all of our leaders?
You remember our interview with Conrad Hunter and his statement that feedback is love.
Yes.
They consistently have asked for feedback in one form, fashion, or another. And I think that's one of the things that's very common.
Yeah. So, a couple of them were like the 360 feedback loop. That's one where it's been studied over and over again, utilized by many, many great leaders. And you essentially, one form of it that we found to be really successful in our organization where you had about 8 to 10 people that provided very conscientious, well thought out feedback. And they were your superiors, your peers, and your subordinates. And they provided this feedback at your request, and they were free to be honest with no repercussions, as long as they stayed, of course, within professional boundaries. And it's incredible what you find, and oftentimes it's very intimidating at the beginning, and you can feel attacked and you can feel frustrated, and a lot of visceral reactions often occur. So before you do something like this, be sure that you have somebody that kind of either coaches or mentors you through the process, because it can be really difficult for somebody who has a very strong personality and their first response is to defend themselves, as opposed to looking at the feedback as, I asked for this, I asked for them to be honest, and if they're saying that I don't respond to their emails, then I don't respond to emails, and I need to accept that. So I thought the vulnerability that all of them showed in opening themselves up to that feedback, and of course then there's one-on-one feedback that occurs later. But what about you? What did you see in terms of feedback?
Yeah, so there were a couple things. One, I really liked in our interview with John, he got too much feedback. They said, we've given you enough feedback, go away. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, exactly. He got so excited, he liked the feedback, then he got so used to it, it's finally like, okay, yeah, I love that. That was hilarious.
And I think all of the guests created this culture where giving robust, constructive feedback not only was okay, but it was the expectation. I've worked in organizations where they've got that, and people are routinely giving good feedback, positive feedback. And I've worked in an organization where, it was a check the box exercise where I have to go out and ask for feedback and they tell me what I want to hear. It really depends on that culture that you create. And obviously at Fit for Work, you guys created a culture where that was the norm.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing is then others invite that for themselves. When they see you as the CEO doing it, then they accept feedback from you in a much different light, because they understand the meaning behind it, the context of it, that it's not just blurted out, with no thought behind it. And then they begin to invite it. And so that's even better, is when they ask, what am I doing well? What am I doing where I could use some assistance? And how do I get to that next level? And so those feedback loops are great. But yeah, I did think it was funny how John got to the point where it was just like, he became kind of a feedback crack addict, and it was just like, it's like, hey, you're doing fine, keep it up. And I'll tell you, as somebody that started the company 20 years ago, that was difficult for me, because I had always had to make all the decisions along with my business partner Keith, who this is a forecast into the future, but he's been invited and is willing to come. So you're going to love hearing Keith Adamson on our podcast in an upcoming episode. But yeah, I mean, we had to understand that while we were owners and we were founders, even we could receive good, meaningful feedback, and we had to swallow our pride. And that's the other thing is I found the all of our guests being people who they had to shelve their pride, and they had to accept that other people may have really good ideas and opinions, and so because they're open to feedback from subordinates and peers, and when you don't necessarily have a superior, meaning you're an owner, your peers or your clients are the ones who give you feedback that you should value. So,
Yeah, I personally love the 360-degree feedback process. The first time I was exposed to it was probably in the early 2000s, and I remember looking at this and going through the SARA process. Who said what, and after I got through that first feedback session, the company I worked for, they did it at least once a year. And after I got through that very first session, it got easier. And then, like John, I started to get hungry for more. And there was even one time where I included my wife in one of the surveys. She was categorized as an other rater in the survey. So got some, I didn't know exactly what she said, although I could probably guess really easy. But it was kind of cool. And, I see that with people that I work with today, with the 360-degree feedback in a lot of times where they don't have that culture. We'll send an email to their raters and just saying, hey, this is part of my development. Please help me by giving me good feedback. Then we go through the process of gathering the survey and the results and spit out all the cool reports. Then we walk through what that meant, kind of encapsulating some of the verbatim comments. And I'll tell you, for me, when I get verbatim comments in the 360, I just love that. As a matter of fact, I usually skip right to that page so I can see all of the real meat of the process. But then after we get all of those reports together, then we go through the hard part about building the action plan. We'll take out a couple of things that we're really, really good at and build the action plan, the tactics to improve upon that. And then we'll find something that we're not so good at and build a plan to manage that weakness. And it's just a neat process. And again, I use Conrad's feedback is love almost every week.
Absolutely. And so, that's something for our listeners to hear and hopefully try and implement. And maybe it's something that you can't roll out within your own organization. You're an up and coming leader, or you're aspiring to be a leader, but you're wanting to begin to incorporate some of these ideas into your overall lifestyle. Then maybe what you do is you find somebody who can coach you, mentor you through that process and help you get that feedback. So starts off with maybe one-on-one or one-on-a-couple feedback. If you're involved in your church or a civic group or something, maybe there's a couple of your peers that you feel like you could talk to and say, hey, can you give me some feedback on this? And what am I like?
Yeah.
Don't give me just the good feedback. And that can be it requires a lot of trust. It can be very difficult to hear someone say, you know what, sometimes you're not really nice and you come across being sarcastic and a jerk. And that's hard to swallow. But if it's necessary, then better the words of someone that loves you than the lies of an enemy, right? So
Exactly. So Tom, we hit on finding a mentor and 360-degree feedback. What else did you see as a commonality in the leaders that have been guests on the show?
Every one of them talked about servant, servant heart. They were people centric. I think I heard you use that term before. They were people centric, but they all had some type of servant's heart that was expressed both within their organization and the way that they cared for their people, and into their social life or into their community, the things that they were either doing outside of the work environment or perhaps with parts of their next stage of life where they were going to be setting up or participating with not-for-profits. So all of them had some type of a servant's heart and were people-centric. And what it comes back to for me is that if you don't care about people, if you don't care about those in your organization, then you're not caring for the very building blocks of the organization, because without them, it's just bricks and mortar. You can replace bricks and mortar anywhere. And in fact, I'd even say that right now is an even more challenging time for leaders, because you've got to be able to connect and serve people in your organization, and now you're having to do it at a distance too. And so we even heard ideas that people use for connecting with people within, leaders have with it, for connecting with people in their organization, Zoom happy hours and those types of things, which is probably great too, because if they're having a happy hour from home, then they don't have to worry about, drinking and driving or whatever the case may be. But
Right.
whether they were making coffee or cooking a meal or having a drink, they were finding ways to connect with people. So for me, that's what it was. It was number 3 would be a servant's heart, and it really comes down to caring for others.
Yet I would go so far as to say, if you don't care about the people you lead, if you don't care about your constituents, you're not a leader.
I agree. You may be a manager, but you're not a leader.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
if you're successful, this might be one of those cases where you're pretty lucky, because that's not
Yeah.
a good strategy for success, and definitely not something that these successful leaders that we've interviewed have shared. And I'll tell you, going back to Kathleen's story, starting a orphanage in the Philippines. I've seen Lynn. I've seen her just out and about in the community doing all kinds of great things in the communities in which she's lived and served. Everybody has really done something, and not just like the common, I went and volunteered at this organization, but really, raised funds and connected and, chaired some of the boards in the communities. And I think that's pretty important. And, one of the things that I'm seeing in successful companies is, socially responsible initiatives. I go back to one of the cable companies I worked for, Cox Communications. They are a great example of doing it right on a lot of fronts. But one of them is really giving back. And, the Cox family, they believe so deeply in taking care of the environment that they've got a foundation called Cox Conserves, and the Cox employees, tens of thousands strong, they'll go out and clean up a river. They'll go out and do some things in the community to help. One of the neat stories about Cox Communications that really blew me away when I was working for them, the cable companies have a huge fleet of vehicles, and the big trucks with the buckets on them, they typically have diesel motors. So they're running around town with these diesel motors that pollute. Then when they're on the job site, they use those diesel motors to run the hydraulics that run the bucket to go up and down and all around. So these trucks are idling or running diesel pretty much 8, 10, 14 hours a day. And Cox Communications, Cox Enterprises, the Cox family felt that it was so important to be good stewards of the earth that they spent about $100,000 per truck to replace these great big diesel engines with gasoline engines that also had these smaller generators to run the equipment. So, obviously they use the gas motor while they're driving from point A to point B, but when they got on the job site, they shut the big gas motor off, turned on the small generator, and were able to do their work. And, by reducing the emissions into the atmosphere, they're doing their part. And it was just amazing because, here's a for-profit organization spending a ton of money to be good stewards of the earth. And that's not the only example. It's just an amazing company. But
Right.
That servant attitude is just out there.
Well, and that's the thing is it's easy to stroke a check sometimes or drop a dollar into the basket, but when you commit your time, when you put your mental capacity and your skills, and you utilize that for something outside of yourself, that's going to benefit you directly, it just you regain so much in the form of what you've been able to help others achieve. That I think it's wonderful.
And it becomes contagious too, right? If I'm doing
absolutely.
it, then the people around me are going to want to do it, and it's rewarding. It feels good, and then you continue doing it.
I always say, I'd like to encourage people, but I like to provide an opportunity, not an obligation. And so, doing that within your own organization, say, look, whoever wants to come out there on Saturday and we're going to clean up a park or whatever the case may be, and then you turn it into a nice time for their family to enjoy it. I think that whole concept of caring for others within your organization, outside of your organization. I have a quick story. There was a waste management company that we worked with up in the Midwest, and so they're all garbage haulers. They go out and they're the ones that pick up the garbage at your house every day. And we were having a big safety initiative and trying to help them and their families understand the importance of safety and why it was so important for mom and dad to be safe and wear their harnesses and wear their hard hats or whatever the case may be, or drive safely. And so we put together this idea that we would have posters, and they would take these. We gave each driver a big whiteboard and encourage them to go home, work with their family, but specifically their kids. Gave them a box of crayons or markers and said, "Hey, we want you to talk about safety with them, and then we want them to draw a picture of what safety means to them." We were blown away by what we got back. It was all posters, and the bulk of the posters had something about, this is what safety means to me, and then it would say something like, so mom and dad can come home every night. So my dad comes home and isn't hurt, so he could play with me. So mom can come home and rest safely. And I mean, just all of these things about the way that the kids saw the job that their parents do, because some of them had seen some of their other friends' parents hurt and things like that. So caring about the people that work for you and extending that to them, and then seeing the way that it came back and what they ended up doing. We came back 2 weeks later for follow-up, and all of the posters where all of their personal accolades and everything had been on the wall, walking from their meeting room out to the trucks. All of those were taken down at the driver's requests, and all the posters were lined along the wall. And after the meeting, the drivers would walk by and they would touch the poster of their family. I still get chills just thinking about it. Like it was emotional, because they were walking by going, that's my daughter that wants me to be safe. So, that level of caring, and not just trying to shove safety down their throat, but showing that they truly cared. It really meant a lot to those drivers, I can assure you. So
now here's the data nerd in me. Were you able to see a reduction in accidents or medical costs or, workman's comp as a result?
As a matter of fact, so in over 20 years of on-site services, we never failed to reduce a client's workers' compensation costs by at least 50% every time. And in their case, it was more in the range of about 78%. And because there's sometimes things happen and all of a sudden there's a big cost, but the overall recordable injury rate, meaning the individual injuries to each person, it dropped by close to 90%.
That's amazing.
So it was phenomenal. But they were the people who, they drank the Kool-Aid, they mixed the Kool-Aid, they poured the Kool-Aid, and they were on board with preventing injuries.
How cool is that? So what else did you see in terms of things that these leaders have in common?
So each one of them, to a T, had some type of adverse situation that they overcame, and it was just incredible and really moved me in terms of their stories. And I thought back to the times that Keith and I had those situations, or even when situations occurred earlier in my life. 28 years old, I'm diagnosed with stage 4 non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. I have almost a year of chemotherapy, a bone marrow transplant, a 6-month-old daughter when I'm diagnosed. But my wife was so strong, and God was so good to us, getting us through that. And eventually, just having to ask Sherry to get me a drink when she was going into the kitchen, and she turned to me and said, "You know what? The doctor said you're supposed to be up and moving. You need to get it yourself." So they didn't allow adversity to hold them back. They overcame it and then moved forward. And so it was incredible.
Yeah, some of the stories were just amazing. When I think of adversity in my life, it was like, had a bad day, woke up on the wrong side of the bed, something like that. These folks overcame some serious challenges and came out the other end much better and more determined and with a stronger vision. It just really blew me away.
And I want to even speak to that even more. If you're listening to this podcast and you're in the middle of that, you're facing an adverse situation, and you don't know where to go, reach out to Michael and I. You know, we're not counselors. We're not saying that we can do anything other than listen, which maybe that's what you need, is just somebody to listen, and you don't have that. But also providing you assistance and at least moving you forward through that and getting you in contact with people that can help you. You know, 2020 has created this, and correct me if I'm not wrong, but tell me if you disagree. 2020 seems to have created this environment that's very depressing. It's oppressing. It feels like this black cloud, and we're all like something from a Linus, Snoopy and Linus cartoon. And who's the kid with the cloud that hangs over him all the time?
Oh, goodness.
He's always covered in dirt. In any case, I know I'm blanking on it. In any case, that's what it felt like. In 2021, my mindset is crush it. Absolutely crush it. And so, we've talked about some of the stuff here. I've got other initiatives that we're rolling out this year, opening our Grease Monkey, expanding our real estate, and working on some initiatives that are going to reach out to the community that we'll talk about later on in another episode. And so if you're sitting there and you're facing that moment of adversity, go back, listen to our folks and listen to our guests and hear how they got out of those moments and they used it to change the direction of their future. And you can too. I just want those words of encouragement to be to you today.
Yeah, and I think that's important. I've got a friend I was speaking with last week who's a mental health professional, and she is inundated with clients. And I asked her why, and she's like, I don't really know, but it seems to be somewhat COVID related and lack of human contact related.
Yeah.
So to Tom's point, if you've got an issue, if you've got an obstacle, we are not licensed mental health professionals, but we're pretty smart guys, and we can talk through it. We can listen. And if all else fails, we can find you some resources to help you get through it.
Yeah. And we'll most certainly be praying for you.
Absolutely.
So what about the fifth, kind of as we're getting ready to land the plane on episode 11? The listeners have been incredible with their feedback. We really appreciate it. Our guests have been phenomenal for this first 10 episodes, and we sincerely appreciate everything that they've done to contribute to the lives of others. What's the last thing that you kind of would say? This is something that was consistent across all of our leaders.
I'll tell you, it's the biggest one for me, the most favorite for me. It's being a lifelong learner. Every single one of them were lifelong learners. They were reading something. They were watching something. They were learning about something. And, even when you're towards the end of your career thinking, it's a couple more years to retirement, or I'm already retired, they're still learning. And I really appreciate that about them. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you, one of the guests, Conrad, he helped me become a lifelong learner. I didn't like to read. I'd go to classes here and there and learn some things. But he is actually the person that made me, probably twisted my arm a little bit, but made me learn to like to read. I think I told that story about him handing me I don't have the book up here. I've got many books up here, but I don't have that one. Handing me the Giant Leadership Challenge book and, reluctantly going through it. And once I started through it, I was hooked. And from then on, I just read and read and read.
Yeah, absolutely. They all had some type of, they were either reading a book, had just read a book, were getting ready to read one, and then they were also involved in some kind of a mastermind. Something where they got together with a group of people and use that creative energy to provide feedback into their own life or into somebody else's, and also propel them forward, in terms of almost like an accountability group as it relates to business. And I love that. Everybody's binge watching. It's like, what are you going to binge watch now? I think that's another thing 2020 taught us, was to binge watch. And I think instead of doing that, maybe we should binge read. So
yeah, that's actually Conrad Hunter. One of the bits of advice he gave me nearly 20 years ago: if you're watching more than 30 minutes of television a night, you're doing yourself a great disservice. And
Ruh-roh.
Yeah, I know it. And, that's one of those bits of advice that I have in my mind, but I haven't been able to quite get it down to 30 minutes.
Oh, absolutely. Well, and that's the thing, it's, I wish that we could through our podcast or post the entire conversation that we have with people. We have to edit it down as it is, to around 50 minutes. We're typically talking to them about all kinds of things. Some of it is just catching up and what they're doing next. And it's just amazing, the people that we've talked to. And so that was the first 10 episodes. This is episode 11. And anything that you want to close us out with, Michael?
I am just grateful for everybody who's listened. That we've got a greater audience than I ever imagined in 11 episodes, and it's just been so much fun. It's been great talking about leadership with you. I really enjoy the chemistry that we have and the discussions that we have, and I'm just looking forward to episode 111.
Yeah, can you imagine? Gosh, that's 2 years from now.
Yeah.
I think we could do it. And we're also going to have to do some remote episodes, like from a beach.
There you go.
Or a mountain,
I have the gear.
Awesome. The gear for a beach, what does it take? Just
well, I'll tell you what.
Speedo.
There is a guy who I watch his YouTube channel, and he does everything. His podcast, his YouTube video, all of the editing on an iPad Pro. And I know the two of us, you and I, each happen to have an iPad Pro. So
yes, we do.
Here we come.
We probably have a lot of gadgets. So here's the thing, though, is this can't be done without listeners. This can't be done. Well, I guess we could be talking to no one, but but we do have a great audience, and so we'd love your feedback. Tell us what you thought about the last 10 episodes. Give us feedback on what you'd like for the next 10. And what's going to keep you listening for 100? One of the things that we're talking about doing right now is not necessarily a book review, but looking at some of the things that we're reading and that our guests are reading and breaking it down into succinct points for our listeners, encouraging them to go out, buy it, and read it themselves. But in just a few moments, being able to say, this is why you should. And so, that's an idea that we have, but there are so many wonderful people willing to give back to the community and the people around them that I think we're not going to have a problem with people that we're going to be interviewing. But if you're a listener and you've got ideas, please let us know. And so, Michael, I'll let you close us out, but I just want to say thank you to all of our listeners. I want to say thank you even more to our guests who have given of their time, energy, resources, and their experience, told us their stories, and helped our listeners in ways that they'll probably never quite appreciate.
Absolutely. And thank you all for listening, and we'll catch you next week with a brand new guest. Have a great week.
Thanks for listening to Two Guys on Stuff. Tune in next week as Tom and Michael talk more about leadership stuff, life stuff, helpful stuff, and maybe even your stuff. Until then, keep your stories fun.